Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about an introduction to motion capture. Tomorrow, we will be discussing story, structure of story, how to think about how to build a story. And then Friday, our friends from Hedge are going to join us, and they're going to talk about some of the new products they have coming out. And then finally, on Saturday, we have education. We don't put that on YouTube, but 10 o'clock, our own Erica Sandstrom is going to be here talking about green screen in the classroom. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Courtney?
Okie doke. First up is from Josh Hutchinson James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland. He says, what does the acronym CRI mean for lighting, and why is it important? Or why is higher better?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, so CRI stands for Color Rendering Index, and fundamentally it's the way that the bulb produces colors. Think of it more simply as it's a measure of how well the bulb replicates the sun. Now, a perfect CRI number is 100. It's really hard to do. If you buy cheap LEDs at your local store, you're going to get 30 to 50 CRI. The cheap LED strips will be closer to the bottom of that. I have some Elgato lights that are 92, and if you're buying a very high-end home, then we'll put over 90 CRI in all of the bulbs in your home, because they make the colors more vibrant, they make the light easier on your eyes, they can change between the different daylights of sunlight and sunset. So the higher the CRI, the better. The lower, the less accurate it will allow you to reproduce the colors of the things you're looking at.
Sorry, I muted myself. Next question.
Okay, this one comes in from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. It says, for those of us working on the East Coast, is it possible to volunteer for just the first hour?
I'm sure that there's some places that you could volunteer before the show or even for the first hour. The best thing to do is probably talk to Josh Kaufman and find out what is needed, and he can probably help you through that process. Next question.
Okay. This one comes from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. He says, Josh Kaufman, how did you create the show infographic card that displays prior to the office hours starting?
Somehow we're missing Josh. Let's go ahead and put that one back for now. So we'll cancel that, and we'll send it back into the pool there. Yeah, and we'll come back if Josh is able to get back to us. Go ahead. Next question.
From George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia, says, what is a mix minus and how is it used?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's typically used in broadcast and phone conversations, but what it means is that the audio that you send to the person that's talking to you is missing one of the audio elements, so it doesn't cause a feedback loop or you don't hear yourself doubled coming back.
Yeah, and usually that feedback loop is you. The one thing that doesn't send back is you. So that's the key is to make sure that what you're hearing coming to you is not going to insert it back in. Go ahead, Paul. I can't hear you, Paul. See you? Did we lose Paul? Okay. Yeah. So go ahead, Courtney.
And we kind of mix-minused him. Since if you're doing a remote hookup to someone, they will normally use mix-minus so that you don't hear the echo because there's a time delay involved. So if you do want to hear yourself, you have to arrange a local side tone so that you can hear your own microphone in your headphones if you want to hear yourself speaking. So that can complicate things. But it does allow you to still hear yourself even if you're receiving a mix-minus signal.
Yeah, and the main thing is a lot of times when we used to build the mix minuses, it's a little simpler now, but we used to have literally our aux sends and would have that one channel that we don't want to have repeated back into the system. A lot of times it's the person coming in is being fed to us, so we're getting the other side of it, and what we would send back to them, we would literally just turn the volume down on that aux send to make sure that it doesn't send them back to themselves. Next question.
Okay, coming in from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. For those of you who do voiceover work, what recorder do you use, and how do you manage the various takes?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I have a dedicated Windows PC behind me, and the software that I use on it, which you might refer to as the device or recorder, I'm a sort of a mix of two. I use either Adobe Audition or the old SoundForge because SoundForge is simple. It's just dealing with one waveform. I'm not messing with stereo and other channels that I may or may not be able to use. Those two pieces of software work well for me.
You go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry, I coughed with my mic open. Anyway, I use a MixPre as the preamp, and I feed it into a computer running either Audacity, which is a free software you can download, which does a pretty good job of recording. And since the preamps and everything are built into the MixPre, it handles the audio quality, and also I record on the MixPre as well as a backup. So I'll record it into Audacity and edit it there if I need to. And most of the voiceover work, they really don't like you to dirty it up any. They like just a clean recording and leave the equalization to them because they may be mixing it in with music or something else. So you don't want to normally do much to color it before you send it in to somebody else.
Yeah, and when I do voiceovers, same thing. Either MixPre or Scorpio is what I'm usually recording into. I record the backup onto one of those, onto that mixer, and I use Logic. So I just record the Logic tracks, and I just record multiple takes. Logic kind of has a take system that I can use there, and that's how I approach it. And then with Logic, you can actually have a track, and then you start taking the takes, and then you can turn them on and off, which makes it easier to figure out. Next question.
All right, this one comes in from George Butters in Halifax. He says, as various jurisdictions either remove pandemic restrictions or announce they'll come soon, what will happen to the remote production progress that's been made because of the inability to safely meet in person?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
It'll continue on. There's basically the people are believing that, and I do too, that this part of the pandemic is going to go another 2 years. So there's going to be so many points where you'll want to have remote production, or maybe you'll have a favorite person that's doing another show somewhere else, and they'll be able to remote into your show and do your show, do their show. But then there's also what's going to happen in the future if another pandemic locks us down again. We'll have everything ready. So I think we're really gearing towards being able to do that, and then of course putting it on our resumes. So if we need to go on location, we can go on location. If we need to do remote, we can do remote.
Yeah, I think that the cat's out of the bag. A lot of people have already figured out that they can that their audiences are a lot larger online than they were in person, and so we're seeing partner after partner after partner looking at like, wow, I was leaving a lot on the table. Sometimes we're seeing partners with 20 times the number of participants than they had in person, sometimes more than that. And so the thing is that they're starting to, this is all starting to come around for them. It's not that we'll go back to doing some things physically. It's not like physical events are going to go away, and they will pick up. But the big money now is going to be events that are online, and so that's where the big events are going to occur, is online or in what we call the kind of distributed venues, where there's lots of little venues that are all part of that one big piece. So people might gather at someone's house or their office or these are the watch parties we used to see, but now it's getting much more organized because of the opportunities that are showing up. Go ahead, Courtney.
I'm seeing an uptick with the restrictions being removed supposedly this week. We'll see. In Los Angeles, I'm seeing an uptick in live banquets, live shows where they're usually charitable fundraisers, things like that, and those are going to come back because they like to get everybody together in one room to guilt them out into giving their money. Although they probably had a bigger audience when they had to do them online, but because they weren't live at the time, it was more difficult to get everybody together in one room at the same time. And of course, everybody likes a free meal, even if you do end up paying a lot of money by making a generous donation to
We've had a couple of clients.
There is.
We've had a couple of clients send the meals out, and they said they were about the same price than paying for the hotel. They sent a really nice meal in a box. Some of them have cooked together, where they send all the ingredients out and cook with everybody. Some of them just send them out and have them delivered. But they said that they found that at $125 a plate, which is what they were paying at the hotel, they could send a really nice, food out to all of their folks distributed, and then let them all eat and talk to each other and everything else. And so the bottom line is that the huge injection of energy, people using it, and money move the whole industry forward a decade. And so the thing is that, we're not going to see the end results for another decade, but the shift between the two is, it's permanent. So it's not going to, we're never going to go back to where we were. We will see probably a huge increase in physical events as the restrictions pull back. But it's, it is that turn where the people who really want to do something at a global scale or a large scale used to do conferences for 100,000 people will now do those on, more and more of that will happen online. Next question.
All right, this one comes in from George Butters once again in Halifax. Says, what advice can you give to newcomers to office hours who may arrive when there's a deep technical question being discussed? They don't understand half of what's being said and think that all of office hours is inaccessible due to the lingo.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Don't worry about it. It will sink in over time. We had a language teacher once tell us if you want to really learn a language, turn on the television on the radio from that language channel, like a Spanish TV station. And over time, your vocabulary will improve. And I think the same is true of office hours. I understood about 1% of what I heard. I think I've made it to 7%. But I will warn you that your increased knowledge is directly proportional to how much you will spend on a camera.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's a very wide, eclectic type of questions from one extreme to the other, all the way to making crumpets. But eventually the wheel will turn and it'll be something that you grasp or understand. And if you don't, like Nigel says, it'll sink in. Eventually it'll all start making sense. And when you take all these different data points and put them together, there's a certain amount of synergy starts happening in the media world.
Yep. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, this is my life. Coming into office hours has really helped me quite a bit. Jumping into live streaming at my house of worship, and I've always done audio there and a little bit of lighting, but I've definitely improved. And the reason is because going on a panel has helped me focus on some of these issues, ask questions on some of these issues. But as far as a newcomer or just someone tapping in every now and then, I do a lot of listening, and I don't always have to talk on every single question or try to, just act like I know the answers. So I am knowledgeable about some things, and I think I can interject some answers, and I'm sure that you do too. But that's what I love to do. Thank you.
Yep. Good. Jeffrey.
That's what Macan is for. If you don't know what a term is, you can say, hey, what's that term? And a lot of times, if one of us is watching, we're ready to speak, and we see that, we might say, oh, well, some of the people might not know what this term is, so this is what it is. Otherwise, after hours is a great place. Write down all your terms, come into after hours and say, hey, what's this? What's this? What's this? It's a great learning tool right there.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to actually say what Jeffrey just said, but I'd also follow-up questions. You can pop in a follow-up question to explain it better, or just wait till tomorrow and ask again.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing to do, when we were born, we didn't understand anything about what anyone was saying. And we had a hard time communicating with them. And over time, we just figured it out, and most of what we learned in the last few thousand years was just hanging around other people who knew more than we did, and we slowly absorbed what they were talking about. So that's kind of the approach: is we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about. We don't dumb it down into something where we're trying to kind of talk to the audience, but we'll answer any question. So if you're going to ask, if you don't understand what we're talking about or don't understand some acronym, then definitely put it in. The chances of someone else that needs the same thing is very high. So you may think that it's a simple question, but there's probably 50 other people that don't know what that is as well. So you have to kind of live in that assumption that people are just going to not, that people may be trying to do the same thing you are. We answer as many of the questions as we can on any given day. And then, of course, in after hours, you can wait for kind of a quiet period when we're talking about something, but we stop. That's just blank time to ask questions about simple things, or complex things. And so there's a lot of places that we've kind of created to allow people to interact, but they do have to assert themselves and ask those questions. Otherwise, it will be difficult. You can just learn a lot faster by asking questions. That's why we do it every day. Next question.
Okay, this one comes in from Mitch Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. He says, what do you use when recording 4K video outside of your camera?
I don't know. Understand how do you record 4K outside of your camera, Mitchell?
Well, it depends, but my problem is if I'm renting a camera and let's say I've got a Sony Venice or something and I've got a pocket full of media, if you need more than a pocket full of media, you're in trouble. So sometimes you need to use an exterior recording device.
Oh, I see. You need a recording device. I was trying to figure out, like, how do you record something if you don't have a camera? So anyway, so just the structure of the question confused me. So anyway, so
My apologies.
So you're looking for a drive system for outside the camera while you're shooting. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I would say most cameras have a high-speed data bus like USB-C that will drive a external drive, and just hook up an external drive to it and let the camera do all the encoding and file management and everything else. It just hooks up to the outside drive to record. If you're going to record the image outside the camera, that's a little more difficult because HDMI has to be able to, or you have to have a 4K SDI to handle a signal output that is 4K, and then you have to have a recorder. Atomos makes some that will record freestanding, and there's the Video Assist from Blackmagic, which can record if you hook up via high-quality HDMI cable or SDI cable. And you can use either one of those to record a backup while you're recording. I would suggest recording in the camera anyway, unless the camera only has one reason a lot of people do this is because a lot of 4K cameras have record on CFast, which is very expensive media. And those little C cards are quite pricey, and it's a lot cheaper to record on an NVMe or M2 drive outside the camera. So that's why a lot of people like to record outside the camera. They can get a much longer recording time and a less expensive medium.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
And try getting CFast media right now. It's almost impossible to find. If you got it, it's like gold. But the other thing I'd like to say is that extra points for the device being able to record some of the metadata that's the camera's generating, so you have that when you bring it into your editing system. I know, I have an old Pix 240 sitting behind me. At least it was able to grab the start-stop cues from the camera video stream and start and stop itself. But some of the more sophisticated ones.
I mean, I have to admit that almost all my on-site recordings in the last little bit of time, with the exception of some stuff that we've done with Aries, has been Blackmagic, and it's been super easy for me to plug in a NVMe drive or a T5, Samsung T5 straight in. In fact, the cage that my 6K goes into literally has a slot for the T5s, so you can just slide it right in and tighten it, and it's right there, and then run your wire up to it. And that's the T5s are primary because of that slot, oddly enough, because all the cameras have cages. But we can also, use NVMEs to do that as well. Sometimes I'm using the NVMEs for the larger 12K camera, the Blackmagic 12K, because it's faster. I need, at the frame rates and resolution, 8K, 120 frames per second, I need at least 800 megs a second. And that's even at I think it's either a 5 or 8 to 1 compression. So I need more speed. And then, of course, one of the things we're about to start testing for some of the stuff we're doing is using the OWC drive RAIDs that we plug into the camera. Those are something that we've played with a little bit, but we're going to be potentially using them for a bunch of productions where we can now record a much higher bandwidth out of the camera. So we'll give you more. We'll show you more as we get going. Next question.
This one comes in from all the way from Barcelona, Spain. Diogo Nunes says, I've been testing Teams NDI for future events. Individual speakers and screen share are great, but is there a way to get a gallery view?
I don't think we had the product manager of Teams on last Friday, and if we go back and look at that, I believe that what he said was that we'd have to build that with ourselves as a grid. There's not really a proper grid the way we would see it here in Zoom. It's just the way that it prioritizes it. So I think that you would have to use the Teams NDI out to get all those feeds, or the SDI out of a bunch of computers, and then build the grid yourself in something like a multi-view or your editing system. Next question.
This one comes in from Michael Andreas in Olathe, Kansas. It says, according to the Flow 8 block diagram, I should be able to inject up to 341 milliseconds of delay on its outputs. I have not been able to find this setting on the control app. Can anyone help me with this?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, it isn't on the control app. There's that piece of the interface is not there. So you have to go into the menu system on the Flow 8 itself. And you can go in there and then individually set each channel to a certain delay. Actually, I think it's an overall delay on the whole system. I'm not for sure, but I think it might be on the whole system, and I don't think you can individually.
Yep. I think it's just, I don't have one, so I'm not certain, but I think it's just an output delay as opposed to an input delay. But not 100% sure. Next question.
All right, this one comes in from Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. It says, can you horizontally mirror flip a video of a Tai Chi instructor? When the instructor is moving their right arm, the student will also mirror the move with their right arm, preferably a hardware solution, and the latter later in the edit.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, some monitors will allow you to flip it horizontally.
I think they need it for the stream. I think their problem is getting it out to the stream. So it's how do we flip it in the output?
You can do that on an ATEM Extreme.
And how? I mean, you said the monitor doesn't help, but the ATEM would. So how would you do that?
Well, if you flip it, it seems to me that you're going to be able to stream what you're seeing on your ATEM. Frankly, I haven't done it, but with MixEffect Pro, there's a bunch of different ways to flip the image that you're looking at.
Right. I think they're just looking for what that setting is. But go ahead, Jeffrey.
So it really depends on how you're sending it out for that to happen. I would use Wirecast. You can use vmix or OBS, and that'll actually do the flip. But that's a software solution. If you're doing Zooms, you can actually, excuse me, in the settings, there is a flip your camera right there. There is some software, but that's all post-editing type software, and I don't think there's a way to do it through YouTube unless. Maybe you could flip the monitor in as Mitchell was going to say, and then bring that into like a Zoom or Teams, and I believe it'll come in as the flipped version.
Yeah, most monitors that flipped won't pass through that way. You know, they'll flip the image as they display it, but it takes more processing to pass it out. So I've never seen a monitor take one in and the output of the monitor be flipped. Go ahead, Courtney.
As long as you're using a camera that is not a USB camera, you can run it through a Decimator MDHX, which is a little $295 box that can change frame rates and scale and also mirror flip and your image. And so you run it through that first, and the output of that into whatever your USB interface into the Zoom is, and your image then will be inversed for everybody receiving it.
Paul?
Yeah, as a former student of Master Choi at the Chinese Y in San Francisco, I can tell you what the problem is with 99% of Tai Chi videos. They're always shot from the front. And when they teach Tai Chi, the instructor stands with his back to the class. And then you follow the Tai Chi movements looking at the instructor from the rear. That's the only way you can really pick it up.
I think that the challenge is that you probably, when he does that, you have a mirror in front of you, right? So you're getting to see the front of, in most martial arts that I've been in, there's a mirror in front so that we can see you're standing behind someone, you see them from behind, but you see a mirror image so that you can actually see what they're doing. And what we've done for some videos is actually give that split screen, so you have a front and back camera. So you're watching that with the front, because sometimes there's hand motions or other things that will be, you can't see from behind, or other things there. So I think that for 20 years, I've thought that there's a market to do this in real-time 3D, and that you can rotate the character to wherever you want to watch it, or have them turning. And I think that we're not very far away now. Next question.
All right. This one comes in from Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California. It says, I know it's not advised to run from one network switch to another, but does it work? And or would it be better to go from a network switch to another router with ports on it?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The best thing to do would be to get a router that actually can create a different VLANs, and then you can run a different VLANs from there. It's very possible to run two different networks off the same infrastructure, and a lot of people do it. In fact, if you ever went to a coffee shop, you'd have the registers on one VLAN, and then of course the public Wi-Fi on another. It's not recommended to do that, but a lot of them do that for their. So the best thing to do is to find a router that can handle the traffic that way, and then figure out your infrastructure from there.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, my main thing is I'm trying to extend from a switch, coming from a router to a switch, and I need to extend it another 150 feet. So I was wondering if the switch would help me to do that, or should I just go through some kind of an amplifier, or how would I, actually go from that 150 feet away to that switch that's located maybe 100 feet from the original?
Yep. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, you should be able to do it fine. I do it all the time. I run from one switch to another, and you let only one of the and they're just a smart switch. It doesn't have a DHCP router in it, so you let one of your router do the DHCP routing, and the other is just a smart switch. And once that switch determines, the pathway to any other devices from its input, it builds a routing table internally, and it doesn't even have to examine the packets on the way unless they change. And so it's very low latency, and it shouldn't be a problem setting a second switch in line, as long as you set the settings right.
You're much better off with a switch than a router in the case that you're talking about. And I would even try to not have a smart switch in there, just a dumb switch that's going to do its thing. It's not going to do any thinking at all. It's just going to move it over. And the only thing you have to worry about is power. If the switch loses power, of course, you're going to lose your signal. Now let's go to the next question.
All right, this one comes in from John Swan in Houston, Texas. Says, for anyone thinking of joining the Office Hours panel, what are the standards for what the shot composition should look like? I notice no panelists have any motion in their background and no camera switching, etc. Is there a rule against flashiness?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I would just use common sense. I mean, what looks good to you with a camera and a background is probably going to look good here on Office Hours. As far as standards go, we try to avoid big, bright, flashy backgrounds. Try to avoid too much product placement where you may have a big logo, but I think Alex could probably address that better. We're kind of in the process of working this all out.
Go ahead, Mitchell. I'm sorry, I'm not Mitchell, Paul.
Yeah, personally, this is just me personally. I like seeing people in their natural environments rather than just seeing a colored background, but that's just me. And generally, the Office Hours standard is to have a circle that you fit in with a grid, and you fit in within that grid. And so it's a good idea to be able to adapt to the norm and then deviate from the norm if it seems appropriate.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Paul touched on it. Do you want to make your head size as close as possible to the head size of everybody else in the panel? And that's why we have this little grid that we have put up during the mic checks so that you can kind of align yourself. We frown on virtual backgrounds because it almost always, unless you've got a perfect green screen and a perfect compositor, I'm talking to you, Nick Justison, having that perfect compositor, you see the dancing line around people, and it's highly distracting. It's also distracting if you have any animated signs or logos or a video monitor behind you playing something that's not relevant. That can be distracting too. So anything that distracts, and bear in mind that in Office Hours 2.0, they take a slice out of the frame, so only about this much of you may appear in the frame. So anything that is right over your shoulder can be distracting and will likely get cut out many times.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I would separate out the difference between standards and rules. I was learning this the other day. Standards are things that we all agree to and you have some flexibility in. And I think we've all agreed to try and simplify our frames to try and focus it. Then there are rules. And what I think that 2.0 guidance is a rule. And so I don't think there are many rules, but you need to follow those. There are a set of standards that you have some flexibility with, but improve the perception for other people who are watching the broadcast.
Yeah, having a moving background because it is naturally there's something behind you that's moving. It's probably okay. The real problem you end up with is that Zoom has a very limited bandwidth. And so when you start moving all the pixels that don't matter, that means the pixels behind you are the pixels that don't matter. And when you start moving them, Zoom is using up its bandwidth to take care of that background instead of you. And that means that you will look softer. You will be more likely to break up. You will, we won't see you as clearly. So moving images behind you actually defeats the temporal compression of the system. So it's beyond just a standard. It's technically, undermining how you look on the show, which is what we're trying to avoid. Next question.
Comes in from Greckmeyer in Topping, Virginia. It says, I'm now bringing my 8x8 green screen setup to our youth night, an office hour suggestion. Any recommendations for backgrounds? I've got an animal herd running and a news set.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, your best ally in this effort to find a background is just go to Google Images and type the keywords for the background you use, and then find some kind of open source visual photo or artwork that you can use in your background.
Good, Tim.
Yeah, so I was a youth minister for am I on? I'm sorry. I was a youth minister for 19 years, and the background and having things exciting for youth is pretty fun. So maybe sports events or sports things going wrong. It depends if you want a distraction or not, or what part of the time it is. So if you're just starting out, you want something fun and fast, those kinds of things, agony of defeat, sporting events, things like that are good. What you don't want to do is maybe a live event where you actually blow something up in the youth room, which is maybe something I have done in the past.
Yeah, so one of the things to think about is look at those images based on the framing that you have and try to get something that looks as natural as possible. So you're looking for what we do a lot of times is actually shoot footage so that we shoot it with the same camera we're shooting it for green screen so that we have the same focal, same vanishing points and everything else. It looks a lot better. But you can get away with kids, you can get away with a lot. They'll just be excited that it's working. So little weather things are a lot of fun. Kids enjoy that. A news thing is fun. But also historical ones. So if you're going through something like OBS or Memo Live or something that's got some software in it, or even, that where you can control things like the saturation and color of the foreground. We've done things where the kids get to go into a black and white image and we make them black and white. So we're keying them and then making them black and white and then putting them, and sometimes we've set up layers so they're like behind one person but in front of another one. And you start inserting those things in and people get pretty excited. It depends on the age, but they if they're, especially in the under 14 range, we find that they have a lot of fun with it. They get really creative. Next question.
All right, coming in from Tim Holman, San Lorenzo, California. He says, can the panelists help Paul Wallace correct his camera color? Uh-oh, shot across the bow. If one finds their color way off, where do they start to improve it?
I'm just going to jump in here. We're probably not going to try to do this in the middle of a show, but this is what we use after hours for, or the pre-show for, to do the correction. So that's a great kind of lab area to kind of manage that. And all the colors are, for all of us, are always a little bit somewhere. So we're still slowly tying that back in. Next question.
Coming in from Junior Grant in New York, says, are there plans for transcripts of office hours?
If you go to the transcripts that are in there.
Alex is suffering from a packet loss, Alex, so you might pause for a second and then start again because we lost a lot of that.
That's where we would go with that. If you can hear me.
Oh,
can you hear me? Go to the next
all question. We heard was that's where to go with that. So
YouTube.
YouTube. Okay.
YouTube does it automatically. YouTube does it automatically.
Okay.
And this will be the last time I ever come to you in this hotel. including tomorrow morning, because I'm going to move. All right. Next, after I leave, I'll tell you which one. Tomorrow, ask me, what hotel were you staying at, so that I can tell you what hotel you should never stay at again. All right. Next question.
Coming in from Adam Grove in Toronto. New to office hours, great panel. What are your mic recommendations for headset or lavs? Thanks.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, some of you aren't going to like this answer, but a lot of people, when they're in their cars, they use the Parrot Bluetooth, and it has an excellent sound. But as far as a studio setup, I'm going to defer to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I think the Parrot is good for comms. I think it's a little thin for listening to for a long period of time. It's got a lot of noise rejection that causes it to be a little harder to listen to. For the really inexpensive ones, a lot of us are have used Piles or the Pulsons. What I'm using right now is a Countryman H6. I also use a DPA 4066. As far as lavs, usually I'm using either a Shure or a Sanken lab, very different range in price. And I try to avoid lavs whenever I can. So they're nice to look at. They're just I can hear them all the time. So you can wear them. And again, I tend to go with those systems. Go ahead. Next question.
This one comes in from Mitch Hill. It says, in Wilmington, Delaware, says the great Douglas Trumbal, who did the effects in 2001, Space Odyssey, Blade Runner, Silent Running, has passed. Do you think there will ever be another special effects guru at this level?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, they say we stand on the shoulders of giants, and Douglas was a very practical man back in the day. He had to invent the cameras, the dollies, the models. He did everything that led to CGI. And I don't know that he's as active in CGI, but for practical stuff, things like that, where you built models and you zoomed in and you did hero shots and lighting shots, that's sort of becoming a lost art. So I guess what I'm saying is that things change as long as we remember what he was trying to teach, and how we got there, basically.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry to hear of his passing. Doug was quite an innovator, and a lot of people don't realize that he was leading the charge into show situations that are used in a lot of theme parks that use high frame rate film coupled with a motion base that tracks the motion base according to what's appearing in the film. He had developed the show scan process, which was a 60 frames per second, 70 millimeter projection that was used in a lot of those theme park attractions for years. And he was more of a mechanical genius, mechanical and optical genius. So he knew a lot about perception. He researched a lot about the human eye and perception, and incorporated his findings into building equipment that would meet the quality of projection and film.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, maybe Courtney could address this, but I watched the Oscar nominations, and I didn't see a category for special effects. Is this something they just kind of push off to the side, Courtney?
No, they do have a category for visual effects, and if you look in there will be an Oscar nomination for visual effects. And of course, every year the Visual Effects Society, the VES, has their own awards show where they award best visual effects. And most special effects, because of computers, has moved to the digital world where it's almost always done in computers in post. There are still some mechanical effects that are used during the shooting, but it's usually cheaper these days to solve a problem using digital effects in post, although they don't look as good as a lot of people say.
I would follow up by saying whoever did Dune, I think that should get the best special visual effects. Because they had some pretty spectacular things in there.
I think Free Guy is also, Dune is nominated. I think Free Guy is nominated. I can't remember the others in visual effects right now, but there is a category and there are nominees.
Next question.
All right. Next question comes from David Paskin in Miami, Florida. It says, looking for a free app to add audio delay to a live mic on a Mac, sending audio into Zoom.
I think OBS is the only one that I can think of that has a delay in the audio, so you could pass it through OBS theoretically to get it there. But I don't know of an audio only that's free. Of course, something like Audio Hijack will do it, but it's not a free app. So that's the only one that I've used. I don't know if I've used a free app to do that. So, but OBS you might be able to find some way to pass it through OBS to do that, but you might still need loopback. So you're back into the rogue amoeba land. Next question.
This one comes in from Dave Crowler in Seattle. Says, how do you use a live transcriptionist to Vimeo for closed captioning, as well as to a live CART screen in parallel? Have done it in YouTube, but can't figure out how to do it in Vimeo.
So I haven't done it that much Vimeo as far as the live stream platform, but you should be able to use. It is called stream text. So stream text is basically will take an input and then it will send it out to multiple locations. And we use stream text oftentimes to go to a couple different locations. The other option is most of the encoders, and this is a different kind of encoder. This is the captionist encoder. So an Eclipse or a ProCap they'll usually have two outputs. And so what we'll do is we'll push one to stream text, and that will oftentimes deliver to the cart. And then we have the other one that is doing a contribution to our live platform. And I haven't done that with Vimeo, but it's worked with most of the other platforms if they're taking in, a direct stream. So those are the two ways that we do it. And then that stream text they have a viewing system that you can change the font, color, size, everything else, backgrounds to use for cart specifically. And one of the coolest ways that we do that oftentimes is we use a little Chrome, because it's just a web page that's showing that. And we'll use like a little Chromecast and we'll just pop it in the back and have it all preset. And you can have a whole bunch of monitors and you just have to get to the right URL and they're showing it on the monitor. And we've done that for up to 20 rooms. Next question.
This one comes in from George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia. What's the best thing you've learned from being an office hours panelist?
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I've learned a 1,000 things from the panel. But I have to tell you, my best learning actually doesn't come in the show. I pick up fragments of knowledge that I try and stitch together. In terms of active learning, I think after hours, and I think what we did with the Raspberry Pis, where you get to play along at the same time, is probably the best learning I'm getting.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I think that for me, I'm very stubborn about technical things, and I like to think that I know everything, but I don't. And being in this august crew, you find that there are some things that you just simply don't understand as well as they do. So the lesson learned is be ready to change your perception or your mind about certain things that you've established and you don't want to change your mind on. And the other thing, quickly, is you don't have to rely on blue humor or off-color remarks or sarcasm to be entertaining. And that was a hard one for me because I'm an ex-radio guy and that's all I did. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Good, Paul.
Yeah, it's a fire hose. You can't take it all in. The harder you try, the harder it gets to assimilate all of it. And sometimes I'll learn things like 3 or 4 days ago, I learned about synergy. And I should have learned about synergy a year ago. So it's really worthwhile to really pay attention throughout the whole office hours and take notes and then study your notes and then do your research.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, one thing I've learned, but I'm a horrible failure at, is when to shut up. Because when you think you know something about something and you want to chime in as a panelist, there's probably a lot of other people here on the panel that know a lot more about it than you do. So I have to learn to keep quiet at certain times.
I think that each day I keep learning. I learn a little bit of something from everyone. And then for me, I still feel like it makes me better in meetings and better in conversations that we're talking about things that are technical because it's not so much a specific knowledge, but a kind of a wisdom. Like we're talking about this wide range of audio and video, and I have all this stuff that's been kind of flowing around in my head. So when I'm in a meeting, it's all kind of ready in my short-term memory, as opposed to me trying to remember how that all works. And so it's very useful. Next question.
This one comes in from Paul Wallace. It says, any experts on glasses to use with computer screens? UV blocking reading glasses, numbers, what do they mean?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I'll just, I'm not going to answer it because I asked it, but I'll expand on it. I got these through Guy. This is what Guy uses. This is what I use. And they're great for seeing really close up, but they don't have a lot of range. So I'm looking for some glasses that have a really good range to them that I can see up close and see the screen really well without having to take them on and off all the time. And I'll listen now. I'll listen to what everyone says.
All right, Courtney.
Sorry, I needed my glasses to click on that mute thing. I used to have this problem a lot, and one solution is, if you're getting prescription glasses, to have the optometrist tune one eye closer than the other. The problem is they corrected my vision, and they made bifocals, with the bifocals being set to correct my vision perfectly for both eyes. And the problem with that is, when you're looking at a screen that's a certain distance, it may not be set at the distance for reading because your eyes themselves have different correction put into them. So if you have your bifocal, so regular reading glasses work better because the difference in my eyes, one's closer and one's farther away, are equally magnified. Therefore, you have a much longer range of focused vision because your eyesight will switch from one eye to the other eye when one eye can't focus. So I have split vision that way, and if you have your optometrist if you have a difference in your vision from left eye to right eye, to maintain that difference and don't correct it out, because then if you correct it out, then you'll have a more limited depth of field on your reading glasses that you use for your screen.
Next question.
Okay, coming in from Douglas Carmichael, says, I've been thinking about building a lab rack for learning network skills, and as a studio hub. The current Cisco equipment is backordered. Would using the Juniper equipment I have plus a simulator to still teach many useful skills?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I'm not sure what you mean by using Juniper. If you really want to learn Cisco, the best way is to find some user groups in your area and get involved in there. A lot of people have labs already set up. They'll have the Cisco equipment. You'll be able to ask questions. You might even be able to work with them and work with their equipment and go from there. Otherwise, if you download all the materials for the CCNA stuff, you'll be able to get emulators for Cisco devices that you can do tests on, and then they have the Cisco modeling lab that you can order. I think that's like $200 for that, but it gives you some nodes to work with.
Yeah, I would absolutely use the simulators, and the that will make sense. You don't need to build a rack. I wouldn't build a hardware rack to learn how to use Cisco. Next question.
Comes in from Todd Harter in West Palm Beach, Florida. He says, I'm looking for a Final Cut Pro effect that will allow easy reproduction of the picture-in-picture supersource animations found in MixEffect. Looking for something that's free or for sale.
I think that, one of the things that you could think about, and Alex Forty Goldner may have some stuff on his site that will do some of these things, so you have to go look there. But the other thing is that you can build what you want it to do inside of Motion, and then you can save that out as a filter or a generator, or where you can just drag things onto it. And so you may find that it's easier to learn a little bit of Motion and then build those out as presets of how you want it to work. And then when you drag them into Final Cut, it's literally like just drag the videos in. It does all the things it needs to do. So there might be some ways that you can find to use that. Maybe we'll see if we can't get Alex to come on sometime and talk a little bit more about that directly. Next question.
This comes in from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. It says, what are the definitions of Ethernet hardware? Routers, hubs, switches, splitter. What level of thing do I need to create a VLAN to separate web traffic?
Well, yeah, we can beyond the one that you're going to want to use to create VLANs is a router, and so and usually a slightly better router is going to give you more control over how that VLAN works. The other ones are mostly distribution of the signal, but not generating the different layers of information. So I think that you probably want to, the router is what you need for the VLAN, and it's just figuring out what router you use for that whole discussion in itself. Next question.
Okay, coming in from Patrick W. Huber from Poughkeepsie, New York, says, in Metashape Pro, does a bit depth of the photos matter as much as the amount of pixels? Sony's ARW files are not directly supported in the app. Will Alex's A7R4 tests convert raw images into a particular format, or would you just use the in-camera Jpegs?
So you can, the raw can help with some of the textures. I don't find, and Nick can let us know if he disagrees with me here, but I don't find that I get that much more geometry from I don't find that I get that much more geometry than with the raw versus the JPEGs if they're at the same resolution. Go ahead, Nick.
You're muted, Nick.
Can't hear you, Nick. You're muted.
Maybe you can
yeah. So Nick,
I have a button here. Sorry. So yeah, the imagery, in terms of JPEG versus RAW, is going to contribute to your textures more than the geometry itself. So the color information in the JPEGs is enough to generate the geometry, but you could get potentially better textures from using the RAW. On the other hand, you could also reproject the RAW images in another program after generating the geometry, having your camera positions. You could use something like Maya or Cinema 4D, then to take those RAW images and project them into creating really nice textures. So.
And if you take a conversion of if you take a RAW file and convert it to something like a 16-bit TIFF, like if the raw files aren't going to go into Metashape, and I haven't tried to put Sony raw files into Metashape, but if it's not going to take those, if you convert them to TIFF files, like 16-bit TIFFs, it'll take a long time for it to process, but it will retain most of the color information that you had in the original files. Next question.
This one comes in from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. It says, some days I work on a Mac and others on a PC. They interpret the gain from my Focusrite very differently. Sorry, after hours, folks. What's the best way to standardize my volume? I can pipe audio through the camera or ATEM as well.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Are you taking the Scarlett and you're unplugging it from the Mac and plugging it into PC? If you're doing that, that's probably not the best way to do, best thing to do, because you're always having to reset everything up. If you have a primary that you're using for doing the audio stuff and you're just using the other one for like a Zoom call or something like that, then I would probably just use the outputs of your Focusrite and then get another device to actually use as the input to bring into the other machine. That way you can keep it plugged into both machines and use it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
One thing I might suggest, it might be that Zoom is adjusting audio differently from machine to machine from that Focusrite, and Windows and Mac are different platforms. So what you might do is open the audio settings in Zoom on each and feed a known signal level, either a tone or just recite something at the distance you're going to be on a microphone, and don't change the levels, and then turn on auto level in Zoom for a second and see where it puts the level. Where it adjusts the level to, and let it adjust the level, and then turn it off so it'll stay at that level on each independent computer. And that way it can adjust for what Zoom thinks the level it's getting is, with a common level that you have on each machine, on your Focusrite, as you move it from machine to machine.
Next question.
From Lois Richter in Davis, California, says, what is the best way to get a still photo out of a video?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I like to use VLC. I'll get it to a point and then I'll pause it where I want the frame, and then I just go up to video, take snapshot, and I got a copy. But of course, You have to have the video downloaded to your machine.
Yeah, QuickTime will also save out as a frame. So if you open it in QuickTime and just say save current frame, Motion, Final Cut, all of those also will do a save current frame is what you're looking for on the export. So that's another easy way to get frames out of there. Next question.
This one comes in from Todd Davis in Hutchinson, Kansas. He says, I have a bunch of Mac M1 minis coming in. How adept are they as a cheap Premiere editor? Or should we use Final Cut Pro or Resolve instead?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I've got a Mac Pro that I've had for a while that is pretty souped up and runs pretty quick. The M1 Mac Mini blows it away. It's just an amazing piece of gear. I don't know if it's the Apple Silicon in it, but if the application is threaded for it and built for it, for example, Adobe was a little bit behind with Premiere, it's going to slow down. But Final Cut Pro just blast right through the M1.
Yeah, and go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, all three will work fine on an M1, depending what you're doing. If you're doing 8K video, it'll get a bit tougher. But for most video editing, I would tell you to go look at the interfaces. They're pretty different, all of them. And if there's one you're more comfortable with, you may want to go that way. The advantage of Resolve is you can get a free version, but it's really to do with the style of editing and the way you want to assemble things, because they're very different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, the choice between it, as stated here, really depends on your use case and how you like to work. I think that if you're trying to do a lot of, for me, when I'm doing heavy color, I'm going to be using Resolve. When I need to get it done quickly, I'm going to use Final Cut. And then if I'm trying to integrate with other Adobe products, I'm using Premiere. And those are usually my decision trees, for how that works on the Mac at least. So those are some things to think about. All right. I think that we are, let's see here. Oh, we got one more question here. Go ahead. Next question.
Okay, it's coming in from Nick Jesserson in Philadelphia. Says, I just got an ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. Any tips for finding power user resources?
There's this thing called After Hours and Office Hours that are just amazing. You can ask a lot of questions. There is an enormous number of people that have extremes, and so you can jump in. Definitely also talk to the folks that are doing After Hours 2.0 because they're pushing the ATEM pretty far. The one thing I will say is that with an extreme, a little less so with the main one, but with the extreme, MixEffect Pro is a required piece of software to add to your extreme because it just once you download it for building super sources and everything else, it's life altering when it comes to it as an ATEM user. So that little iPad app is the key to the operation. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, +1 on that with a MixEffect Pro. It just made my extreme like a Swiss Army knife that was on steroids. It's great.
Yeah, and then go ahead, Courtney.
If you want to go on YouTube, Aaron Parecki has done tons of videos on using the ATEM Mini Extremes, as has Doug Johnson with DJI Productions. He's got a lot of instructive videos there on using it in production, live production, and so on.
Yeah, and I would say that Aaron Parecki, Doug Johnson, John Barker from Here to Record, who has a bunch of great software that can also be integrated with the ATEMs, as well as Joseph Lanashki or Photo Joseph. They've all done a bunch of videos that you can kind of watch there as well. So those are some great YouTube resources to check out. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Alex is
Next
kind of
question.
frozen. Keep trying, Alex. You're coming in.
Yeah. Next question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I heard the next
this
question. I got the cue. All right.
All right.
This comes from Idris Hagi in Fairfax, Virginia. It says, what are the best practices for managing hybrid teaching? Some faculty were so used to everyone on Zoom on their screen that they are now asking students in the same classroom as they are now asking students in the same classroom as they are to join Zoom and turn their cameras on. That's interesting.
Nick?
It's funny because that was initially going to be part of my answer. We had a couple scenarios where we were teaching hybrid, and it actually worked out better to run like anything that we would normally in person have put on a projection screen and have everyone looking at. We just started having everyone log on to a Zoom meeting and look on their own desks at that projection. We weren't using the cameras on those individual computers, but this way the instructor could teach from their desk and know that everyone in the room and everyone remote was seeing the same presentation. And so that worked out really well. Then the only other thing was the teacher being in the habit of repeating questions that came up in the room to ensure that the folks that were connecting remotely were getting to hear what the question being answered was. It's not an ideal situation. I think Alex will attest to that.
I think Nick was being kind. Hybrid classrooms are a dumpster fire, and so they are a dumpster fire. They will always be a dumpster fire, and because it's so hard to keep paying attention. I get brought into things where people are in the conference room, people are further away. It's hard to hear what's going on. It's hard to see what's going on. You feel like you're on the outside, and you just tune out. You tune out, and so it's for brands that want to do it about their product. This is a great way to make sure people don't come to your next event. So it's not just that it's not good; it's damaging the system. It's undermining people's belief in the education system. It is a disaster, and people are desperately trying to find some way to find this happy medium. This is not a happy medium. This is an unhappy and angry medium. And, and so people are just destroying their systems. This is like just pouring sugar into your gas tank, and so you just have to be really careful. There's not any good way to do a hybrid classroom. The best way to do it is for the teacher to do exactly what they're starting to do, which is get all the students onto their computers or put a screen up in front of them and have the teacher somewhere else. If you have to do something where it's hands-on and you have someone that can operate a camera and they can come in and do those things, then it might make sense because you actually need to show something. But when you're talking about ideas and you're talking about things on screens, I've been doing digital first classrooms for a decade. And I have gotten to the point now where I actively just turn down any speaking engagement that requires me to be in the room, not because I don't want to travel, not because I don't care, because I know I can do it better from my house. I'm just like, put me up on a screen. I have a bunch of screens. I've got telestrators. I've got ways to play things in. I've got ways to show you other angles. It's way better. It's a better experience for everyone, for the teacher to have their own technological cocoon that they can work out of. And there is a rare class that you need to actually be in the same room for that. And I know that sounds crazy, but if we go out 10 years, there's basically the folks that are still trying to do it in the room are just going to get run over by the folks who figure out how to do it digitally. So that's the reality of how this is going to turn out, I predict. So anyway, now we're going to go ahead and jump to the second hour of our little thing here. And by the way, it's really important for, especially when we're at the end of the hour, for our panelists to answer early, especially when I'm on one screen. I can't see. If you wonder why I cut things off, I can't see both screens. And so what I do is I remember who was on when I started talking, and then I just move on to the next question. So you have to get in earlier than that. So now we're going to jump into the next question. One of the things we want to do is we're going to talk about motion capture. We're going to do some motion capture later this year, hopefully with Nick and with others. And I think that as we look at 3D, as we look not just for visual effects or games, but for pre-visualization, for education, there's all kinds of opportunities for motion capture. And so what we thought we'd do is we'd talk a little bit about, answer your questions, but also talk a little bit about how motion capture works, and what actually happens and what's useful about it. And there's a lot of different methods. And it has, when we started it, I think the first motion capture facility I worked in was a $2 million facility at ILM. And it was a whole bunch of icon systems and everything else. And now a system that probably is as accurate as that can be purchased probably for $20,000 or $30,000. And there's ones that are now just your camera and your iPhone or a couple $1,000s for a suit. So there's a lot of things that have gotten a lot more cost effective. And I think we didn't, yeah. And so, yeah, Nick, do you want to throw a couple things in there? And for the panelists, go ahead and raise your hand in the general discussion if you want to say a couple things. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is that the cost has come way, way down. And also the ability to use the technology is very simplified compared to what it used to be. So I'm coming to you from our mocap stage, which is a Vicon mocap stage. And so we have about 30 feet in each direction here as our main capture volume. Yes, our system is a professional grade Vicon system, and it was in the tens of thousands of dollars, not the plural millions of dollars. And the optical systems there's other companies that make them, but this thing that's common about them is that they use cameras with ring lights. So long before there were VTubers and casters and all that kind of stuff using ring lights on their YouTube cameras, motion capture cameras have this ring of typically infrared lights. So they don't actually shine light that you can see into the room, but they shine light on into the space. And in our space, we have like 16 of these cameras all around. So they work like a super accurate miniature GPS system. So when someone's wearing a suit, they're wearing these markers that are retroreflective, kind of like the back of your sneaker for running shoes, or any kind of athletic wear that you run at night in. So the light coming from those cameras bounces off.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I guess where I wanted to go with it is that's one kind of system, and there's OptiTrack and Vicon and a few others, but then there are something called inertial suits, and these are the suits where, just like your phone has a inertial measurement unit in it, IMU, and it can detect its motion, what angle it is and which way is north. These suits are basically track suits that have several of those sensors, and there's one for the upper arm and one for the lower arm, and one, a headband that you wear that has a sensor on it, and it uses measurements from all of those sensors to tell the computer where each sensor is, and then the software will calculate, all right, well, this is the pose that the body is in. So those suits are typically, there are some that are less than $10,000. The best ones, Xsense, are in between 10 and 20. Those are the two main kinds. And then finally, there is a super accessible technology that's still kind of coming into maturity, and that's using machine learning systems to calculate motion capture from just a single video. So you can upload a video from your phone or any video camera, and then the machine learning system recognizes the body form and says, oh, well, here's the upper arm and the lower arm and the feet. And they can get you motion, and it's mostly usable. It's nowhere near the quality of inertial suits. And then optical systems are still like the top of the line, most accurate systems these days.
Yeah, and one of the things that is important as you start to look at this is what resolution do you need? So this gets into like an optical Vicon system or an OptiTrack Prime 41 or whatever is going to have, they have a certain level of resolution for the body, and those cameras are very high resolution, and they're going to get every little motion. Now, there's a couple things there. One is, do they capture every little motion? Also, is how well, how noisy are they as they grab that data? The frame rate of that data. So, a lot of times, some of them, while we may be shooting for a 30 frame per second video, we actually want to oversample that so that any kind of idiosyncrasies can be worked out. So some of these are running, I think, does your Vicon run at 240 or 480, Nick?
Yeah. The lowest we ever set it is 120, and that's at 5 megapixel. And it's not unusual for us to bring it up to 300, and it can go beyond that. It's just that after 300, we start cropping down on our 5 megapixel frame.
Right. Yeah. And these aren't very high resolution, but they just need to know where those dots are. But that added frame rate, what it does is it adds a ton of data between every frame that you actually need. And so then what happens is you apply things, you can apply smoothing algorithms like Butterworth or other things to kind of find our way, like, okay, well, there's some jitter, and you see that jitter when we see a raw motion capture. What you see, well, there's a lot of drama around motion capture and what you actually see on a film screen or a gaming company. So what you see there is minimum, it's been filtered, so you run it through filtering, you apply it. So one of the things that we do with that is that we have because really with an optical motion capture, we just have a bunch of dots, so we have to figure out what do those dots mean. And so we create these rigid bodies. Generally our body has certain things that are rigid, like our upper arm. If they cease to be rigid, there's something wrong. Something got broken. So we look at these things of things that have to move together: our chest, our head, our upper arm, our lower arm. And so these are the rigid bodies, and we'll have multiple points on them. And then if we know where those points are, if any of them are moving, if you get a couple of them moving, I don't need to see all of them at one time to know that rigid body, if the person is healthy, that rigid body is going to keep moving with it. So I can extrapolate the positions of the other points. So I can start to figure out what those are. And so those rigid bodies really help us do what we call the solve. So we can basically, you have this raw data of all these points coming in, then you apply these rigid bodies to them, and then they're driven, then those rigid bodies allow you to solve for where all those points are, even the ones that you can't see. And then you apply those back to your skeleton. So the skeleton is, the skeleton is basically then what drives the character. So basically you have a series of bones that we put into the character, and we attach the surface of the character to those bones. So those bones have, that again is an upper arm, lower arm, so on and so forth. We attach literally the vertices of those to those bones in what we call weighting, because right where the weighting becomes important is like elbows. Like when I move this arm, where do these go? And so they don't fold over each other and stuff like that. That's an intricate process to put together. So those points then go into the rigid bodies. The rigid bodies, are attached to the bones. The bones are attached to the character, and the character starts to move. So that's kind of the process of that, and how we derive what those points are, or what those where that goes is kind of the key to that operation. Now, Nick, you're mostly doing optical, is that right?
Right. Yeah. So we're mostly this is our primary stage. And so having all this Vicon system available, this is our primary thing. The other thing is that this will be used in a virtual production setting, right? So we'll put a cluster of markers, something like this. This is just a fake one, but we could put a cluster like this on a camera. And then as we move the camera through the stage, whether we're using green screen or Mandalorian style virtual production wall with imagery, all of that can update in the computer in real time, so that we can see the computer graphics changing with the motion of the camera. And another technology that's really matured recently is beyond full body capture is facial performance capture. So having a camera mounted on a helmet that the actor wears, and now their face can be captured as well. And so this allows for at least a starting point of a lot of animation to happen very quickly, and it tends to carry some of the nuances that the actor brings to the performance. And so, the animation work starts to become an effort of, plussing up certain things or cleaning out any kind of glitches that may have occurred in the data stream. But it allows for a lot of content to be recorded very quickly, very naturally. And now that it's accessible, it also allows for the creation of a digital character that can then be very readily localized, right? So you could have someone that's the CEO of a company deliver a keynote speech through motion capture, and everyone watching that is getting it in their own language, and the faces, the mouthing those, the delivery in their local languages. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Absolutely. And this is also where things like MetaHuman become useful, because the MetaHuman can, when it outputs a model into Unreal, it comes with all of that weighting that I talked about. All the blends and everything else have all been sent to Unreal. That takes an enormous amount of work. So it's not just that you can create a character. And that's where I get excited about being able to do pre-visualization, being able to do training, where I can simply apply those things. The facial rigs now, you can shoot it with your iPhone. You can definitely get a rig, but the iPhone, can shoot a very high frame rate. It can shoot, a really higher resolution than it can shoot a high frame rate at a resolution that's necessary for the facial capture to get really, really good quality, out of it already. So it's really, the whole market has changed pretty dramatically. Go ahead, Courtney.
I had a question that if you're using the Vicon system, in a situation where you're mixing live action with virtual characters, so that you got a green screen stage you're shooting on, and you're shooting a live actor as well as virtual characters that have markers on them, how different is the latency taken into account, and how does that affect your ability to give a quick render or a previs to the person that's operating a actual camera that may have a tracker on top of it, so that the director and or the cameraman can visualize how the relationship of the live actor to the virtual characters, and maybe a pre-rendered visualization of that virtual character in relation to them and the camera shot. How does latency affect it? And does this one system shine over another of optical versus AI versus accelerometer?
Definitely optical is the way to go in that scenario. And basically every professional camera tracking system is some form of optical base, whether it's a series of cameras around the room like our system. Sometimes there's cameras that are MOSIS and Stipe, where they're effectively take a mocap camera like this and mount it to the top of the camera that's filming, and they'll just put reflectors in the ceiling. And so as this one camera moves with the filming camera, it's following that constellation and feeding the motion of that camera to the systems. So all of these are very hybrid systems. There's different hardware used. And so absolutely the frame delays need to be accounted for. And there's equipment for that. I mean, there's Blackmagic Telnexes, and you can delay frames as they go through. So there's motion data there, right? And then there's the graphics engine. If you're filming live action on a green screen with a motion capture person, now you've got the motion capture system, and that has a frame number and it's got a sync signal. There's the camera filming the live action frame, and that's feeding that into the system. And then you've also got a graphics engine like Unreal Engine generating everything that's going to fill in the green screen. And so all of those systems have to be synced. So I use, this is an UltraSync 1. It's only a couple of $100, and it outputs two signals. It outputs a linear time code as well as what's called a Genlock synchronization signal. And these are also able to wirelessly communicate. So I've got lots of these. So each one, there's one master and then several others that are slaving to it. And so one of these is connected to the Unreal Engine computer. One of these is connected to the mocap system. One of these is connected to the camera. And that way, all of the frames captured are labeled. And also that's the linear time code. That's the label of when that's happened. And then the Genlock sync means that everything happens at precisely the same moment. So if everything's running at 30 frames a second, they're all opening and closing their shutters. They're calculating their data at the precise, within fractions of a second at the same moment. So all of these systems all have to work together. And then, it could be a variant of Unreal Engine. There's Pixotope and Axisymmetry and things like that are derivatives of that might generate the data. And then they'll work with different hardware to handle the synchronization. There'll also be things like a Blackmagic or an AJA board in the computers to receive the sync information, receive the video, etc. So.
And I'll share some of this. One of the things that we've done in the past is done this kind of thing, and we find that the frame sync up with video and audio are within a frame. If you're local, if everybody's local, it's the real latency comes into I'm sending this over a very long distance. So I want the CG character to occur inside of that space from like if I want Nick to have a CG character join me here in Los Angeles, that's where the latency becomes something we have to think about. When we're in the same room, we have a pretty good hence of it. And Danny, do you know how to make me co-host? I just need to be co-host here to just share a screen. Yeah. So we got to make sure that anybody who gets handed that can do it. Yeah. So let me share. I'll show you a rig that we kind of built. Kind of really in a not a particularly detailed way. I'll share this up here. This is from maybe 8 years ago. So this is our rig. Now this is an OptiTrack Prime system that we used here, and we used literally just pieces of I think a Redrock micro system to put this monitor on. Here you can see the tracking. So the balls that are on the monitor are basically building a rigid surface of the rig. And then you can see our motion capture performer with those points, and you can see how those points are defining some of the rigid, what we consider the rigid surfaces there. And so you can see the trackers around it, and you can see kind of the character here. So and that's the actual, I think we can, and you'll see this is a raw capture of that data here. And but that is live. So that's him holding the camera live, and the character. Now but that character is being captured, in real time. The camera is being driven in real time, and that, again, this isn't, we put a physical box there, so they would actually be able to do that. But so that gives you a sense of it. And Nick is showing you their rig, their version of that rig, that looks very similar. And but all of that's happening in a real-time engine, and that was using Motion Builder, was what we were using in that case. But it's something that could be piped directly into Unreal. And again, you want to think past, as the price of this stuff starts to drop dramatically, you want to start to think past the idea of this just being for games or just being for visual effects. This is for education, AR, all kinds of things. The very first time we used our motion capture rig was actually, I got a little one, much smaller one than that, paid $15,000 for it, paid for it in one show by just doing a bunch of little Gumby characters that used to be popular for corporate animations. And we just animated them doing funny things during a piece. The client was super happy. And we paid off the rig. so it was, it was a really quick thing. And was it perfect? No. But was it good enough and really pretty clean? Yes. And that was a relatively inexpensive system. And so you can do things that are relatively cost effective. Let's just jump to the questions. I think we've now given everybody this time to stack those up. So we'll jump into the questions.
Okay, first question comes in from Rick Markley in Wisconsin. He says, I'm not sure how gross this could be, but does anyone know if any motion performance capture suit rentals or loaners?
We've always bought the ones that we've owned for that because of that gross factor of not wanting to know where they come. They are something that you have to get good at washing. I recommend washing in cold. Anyway, so that because they shrink. But it is something that we've owned, and you want to wash them frequently. People are running around in them, so they just get sweaty. So it's definitely a something that you have to kind of pay attention to. Go ahead, Nick.
So we benefit from the fact that we're on the second floor of our building, and fashion is just above us. So there's a full laundry upstairs for dyeing textiles and all, and so the suits are black, and so that's okay. And because we have year after year different students using them, so one of the things I would suggest, number one, is check the universities in your area and see if any of them have motion capture. I know that at Drexel here in Philly, we are available for commercial projects, right? So you could bring your own act. We've had companies come in and bring their own actors and do the motion capture here and walk out with data. And so often you can get really great, if not free rates on that sort of thing. And it's great experience for the students as well. So I'll always advocate for that sort of a thing. And then you can also reach out to the manufacturers. I mean, if you're trying to do some kind of a pilot project, a lot of times the manufacturers will have loaner systems that you can try out and be able to test the system, get some data out, and maybe even use it as proof of concept for things. I know, there's the companies that make the head systems, and the inertial suits in particular tend to, they're really trying to grow their businesses. So there's some opportunities there. And of course, just look up motion capture in the area, and there may be studios near you that do hire themselves out as well. So those would be the main suggestions.
Good, Courtney.
I know a lot of the little retroreflective balls are on Velcro, so they're easily removable if you want to launder the suit. But what about the inertial suits? Does that have built-in wiring that can be removed for laundering, or does that have to be laundry safe as well? Yeah,
the most critical component of those suits is the IMU itself, and they're tiny little chips. I should have brought them over, but I didn't. They come in what looks like a little, if anyone remembers old metal cigarette cases, they basically come in a case like that, and you generally don't keep them in the suits themselves. And so anything that's not washer safe is removable from that suit. And so then you can, get the suit washed.
And you can, obviously we've had some people who have made their own. I mean, this is like diving suits or customized, spandex and, or thicker spandex. Typically it has to be very body clean. So because you can't have anything loose, it won't work correctly. Things will be moving, rigid bodies will be moving around. And so those are things that are more problematic. The thing you have to be careful about with the cloth that's being used in a suit or in the curtains is that while it looks black in RGB and in visible light, it may not look black in infrared. So we actually, when we pick cloths, when we pick our curtains, we'd order samples and then set them down and look at them through we actually look at them through the motion capture camera to see which ones actually look black. And you'd be surprised at how many, especially Lycra, will actually look light gray as opposed to black. And so when we pick the tiles on the floor, when we pick the costume material, when we pick the curtains that we may use, with all of those, we are looking for how does it look in infrared, not necessarily how it looks in the visible light. Go ahead, Nick. Were you going to show something there? Or are you waiting for that?
So this is a typical one
suit.
of our mocap suits. This is from Mocap Solutions, and so this is why, like, a mocap suit is not just a tracksuit. So it's a couple $100 just for this, jacket and pants basically, and then on top of that, each one of these reflectors is $5-10, and so by the time you put enough of these on, it becomes like a $300 suit when you're finished. But yeah, it's really specialized because any surface of this suit holds Velcro, so you can position these as they're needed, and then it has to hold up. It's expected to be maybe stunts, a lot of rolling and things like that goes on, and then it gets washed a lot. So these suits in particular have really held up for us. And in an academic setting, they get used a lot by a lot of different people for a lot of crazy things. And so so these turned out, this says it's 88% nylon and 12% spandex. And as Alex was mentioning, you really can't see through them. You can actually feel there's like multiple layers to this fabric. So there's an outer layer and an inner layer. I'm sure that's to help cancel out any infrared reflections as well as infrared transmission through it. So
absolutely. Let's go to the next question.
Okay. From Ken English in Buffalo, New York, says, at our institution, we have a vision system, 700 square. Vicon system, 700 square feet, that is primarily used for capturing biomechanical data using Nexus and drone flight using a tracker. If we wanted to get into mocap for animation, would we need green screens? Any thoughts?
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so green screens are not necessary at all. I mean, motion capture actually it'll end up giving you video that you composite, but it's just giving you the motion of the body. What you probably will need to do is make sure to get the animation software. So Vicon has one software package for engineering and biomed, that's called Nexus. And the hardware is going to be identical, but that software might be different. So the lab at your school might have Nexus software, and the software that you would want for animation is called Shogun. And that would just be a call to your Vicon rep to find out what costs there may be involved in getting a license for the animation software. And then the hardware would be identical, and then you'd be up and running and you wouldn't need a green screen.
Does Vicon still sell Blade, or did that get merged into Shogun?
That Blade was completely replaced by Shogun. So we still have a couple copies around, but Shogun even imports and opens the native format of the Blade files. So you really don't need Blade anymore.
Yeah, we used to use Blade a lot because we would shoot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of motions, and it had a really deep scripting language. This is before Shogun existed, and you could just push everything through it, and it would do 80-90% of the work, for you to clean things up, and then you just had someone by hand go through and fix the last little bits of things. Next question.
This one comes in from Douglas Carmichael. It says, Nick, could you easily create your trademark compositive virtual set from a mocap stage?
And go ahead, Nick.
I mean, the set itself isn't necessarily tied to motion capture, but we actually have used that set with motion capture. So a couple of years ago, we actually did a streaming presentation for the SIGGRAPH conference. I think it was the 2020 conference, where we had students live action here in the studio on the green screen, talking to CG characters in motion capture in that set. So absolutely, you can combine all of those things. That's exactly the strength of all of this, is really once you have something into a tool like Unreal Engine, it can be used in a variety of ways, whether it's to create a game or stream something or use motion capture or incorporate geospatial data, create VR. In fact, another example that I've seen is Sony had a Madison Beer concert that was done virtually last year. They called it Sony Boundless, so you could Google for that. And the performer, she was in a mocap suit in LA getting all of the motion capture done. And the motion capture director was actually on the East Coast, 3,000 miles away, watching her virtual avatar using VR headset. And so he was directing her through that connection and through a similar kind of mechanism using Unreal Engine. So it's definitely doable.
And you saw the camera motion that I showed from 8 years ago, and we've been doing some version of sending it to a director for almost 20 years now. So, or actually 20 years now. So it is definitely something that, it's just a matter of figuring out. And sometimes we send video of what's happening locally, and sometimes we send the raw mocap data, and so that the director can sit there and just rotate around the scene and be able to look at somebody. It's just, the data of the motion is actually fairly light compared to video. So if someone's got a 10 or 20 meg stream, download, and most directors we can send them the actual raw capture data, or not the raw data, but the bones or the data for the bones, rotational data, and it can be pushing into Unreal or other applications in real time with just an IP. You're going to say something, Nick?
Yeah, I was going to say that actually we had a student back in, I think it was 2012, 2013, who did all of that using an iPad and a Sony PlayStation. So the Sony PlayStation Move controllers, just put those onto an iPad. And I think he programmed it in Unity and literally would be able to put together shots with collaborators in Los Angeles from Philadelphia using this system. And so I think he's really involved in, I think he pretty much heads up virtual production at a little company called Netflix these days. But all of these technologies, it just underscores how long they've been around. He was inspired by the work that James Cameron had done with Motion Builder and that same rig that you had with OptiTrack for the original Avatar movie. So it's been around for a long time, and it's just reaching a maturity level and a price point where it becomes really, really accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
This one comes in from David Anderson in Seattle. He says, are there IR ring lights for GH5 or Blackmagic design cameras?
I don't think there are, and I don't think you need them. If you start deciding, okay, I want to use my Blackmagic camera or my GH5, there's software out there, again, that uses machine learning to basically, you can take multiple cameras, you can take 3, 4, 5 film cameras, turn them all on, and have them record and turn that into motion capture data. There's a couple things that you have to be careful of. One is genlock. You have to be able to genlock those cameras together because they have to be taking the frames at the same time. Another challenge that you'll have is frame rate, that these most video cameras aren't designed to capture at the frame rate that we want from motion capture to get the highest quality. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, the thing is, I was basically going to say exactly the same thing. There's no need for those because the cameras aren't sensitive to infrared light. So even if you used an infrared ring light with a Blackmagic camera, there's actually filters installed on the sensors in those cameras that would cancel that out, and that light would never get into the sensor in the first place.
Yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, Panasonic makes it for $100. You can buy a Panasonic branded light that'll clip onto a GH5 camera.
Yeah, it just won't make any difference for
Yeah,
what
it
we're
won't make
talking
any
about. Like
difference,
you could get one, but it just doesn't help. Yeah. Next question.
Okay, this one comes in from Chris Tyler in Carlsbad, California. It says rigid body avatars need solving because they use rotating joint centers and don't account for linear moving shoulder blades, knees, and etc. What software do you use for your solve?
Go ahead, Nick.
So in our Vicon stage, we're using the software is named Shogun, and that is from Vicon. And so it is designed to track all of that sort of motion. So you'll have markers that are on either side of the shoulder itself, and then also front and back, basically clavicle and base of the sternum, and then matching on the back of that. And the software is designed to model the actual motion of all of the anatomical bones underneath that. So ultimately, the output of software like that isn't the motion of the markers, but you end up getting what we call solved skeleton. We have an OptiTrack stage across the hall, and with that, it has its own software called Motive that does this. So the optical systems themselves each have their own software solution for solving the little intricacies of the anatomical motions that are going on below the markers.
And then beyond what they send out as the solve, a lot of times what visual effects firms are doing is building those rules into the actual rendered outputs. So that is literally building the bones, building the muscles, because beyond just knowing where the basic things are moving, that how does the muscle move underneath the skin is one of the harder things to figure out. You can figure out the bones to some degree, but how is it sliding underneath it? How is it, interacting? How is that when the muscles tense, they change the serration of the muscles will change. And so a lot of that is developed inside of oftentimes Maya and other things these are custom built things. Like, for instance, I think that one of the things that Unity acquired is, in Weta Digital, they're getting a lot of the stuff that Weta Digital had designed around that type of thing. So it'll be really interesting to see, where they take that. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, this is kind of a related question to this one is, in situations where you've got costumes or hair that would be flowing, that would be moving in relationship to the head movement, let's say, or the body movement, like fringe on a costume or something. Do you actually hang little strings with motion trackers on them so that you can track those without having to apply a physics engine later, so that just to save some time in post for doing like the ponytails in Avatar or any kind of dreadlocks or something that are going to move with the body movement?
Yeah, so generally things like ponytails and dreadlocks and things are actually going to be physics simulated, or a combination of that and hand animated for that matter. As you mentioned, on costumes in particular, anything that's in the motion capture set actually needs to not interfere with the motion capture. So if the performer has a ponytail, we actually have some of our head caps are designed to accommodate like keeping a bun underneath them so that the ponytail doesn't hang in front of the markers or land on any of the markers. We did a beverage commercial in here once and sprayed the can with primer paint so it wouldn't reflect the lights coming from the cameras and accidentally get tracked, because we would just track the hand, and then in animation we would just parent the CG can to the CG hand. So for the most part, that's the case. Now, there are times when you want to track a prop. So, maybe your character is using bow and arrow, or they're using a whip, or, something signature to the character, and you do want to motion capture that. In that case, yes, we do marker those things up. If you look at behind the scenes of a lot of the first-person shooter games, the weapons that they use tend to have markers on them so that anything that the performer does with those props, it's also being tracked by the system, and then that data is available to the animators after the fact.
Yep. Next question.
Coming in from Juan C. Robles in Mexico. He says, are there motion capture systems based on accelerometers, and how accurate are they versus the optical systems?
Go ahead, Nick.
So absolutely. That's what we talked about on the inertial measurement unit. IMU suits also often have accelerometers. They'll have a number of those sensors in each chip. And so Xsense is generally considered the better of those suits. Another brand is Rococo. Xsense are more expensive. Rococo is less expensive. Xsense tends to be extremely accurate, almost as accurate as a full optical suit. There's some reports sometimes occasionally of some drift over time, and again, I think that some suits, depending on the hardware, the chips they're using, as well as the software that's been developed with them, is designed to accommodate and reel in the drifting that might happen in the raw data. The big deal about an optical system is what it sees is what you get. So if the marker is there in sub-millimeter accuracy in that 3D volume, that's the data that you get. Whereas the inertial, the accelerometers are, essentially calculating the position and rotation over time based on the motion that they're sensing. And so there can sometimes be a little bit of drift in them. But the suits these days, particularly what I've seen coming from Xsense, are really, really accurate.
Yeah, where accelerometers tend to fall down is very, very small motions. So they tend to handle, if you're just moving and doing this stuff, they do that really well. It's when you, usually with Xsense, they've gotten much better, but when they first came out, I would see the graph, and they finally asked me to stop asking this, because I would just tell them to shuffle their feet. I just need you to shuffle, just shuffle your feet, along a straight line. And that's the thing that accelerometers don't like, because it's so much high frequency information and very small motions, makes it very hard for it to figure out what's going on. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
If you have a limitation on the number of cameras, does occlusion? Can you hear me? If you have
I hear you now.
Okay, if you have a limited number of cameras, does the occlusion make using an accelerometer more a better choice if you've got a limited space? If you're in a location, for example, instead of on a big sound stage where you can surround people with cameras, is it better to use the accelerometers where you don't really have control of your environment directly?
Do you want to jump in on that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely those advantages, right? So another thing about an accelerometer suit is you could have a dancer wear that under a costume, right? So that they could be doing a live in-person performance for an audience, but their motion capture could be streamed elsewhere live, and you don't have to have a line of sight on the suit itself in order to get the motion capture. And yes, I mean, the suits, the inertial suits, the accelerometer suits are not only less expensive, but you don't have to calibrate the whole system. You just put on the suit, you calibrate the suit, and get to work. So a lot of indie artists that work from home in their basements and attic spaces, things like that, small rooms, those are really good solutions, because you can use the entire floor space. One of the things about our optical system is, you might see this room is actually 40 foot by 40 foot. We lose about 5 to 10 feet of the perimeter because it takes that much distance for the cameras up in the ceilings to finally have visibility of the floor. So if you have a small room that's 10 by 10, 15 by 15, certainly you'll have some advantages with an accelerometer suit versus optical.
Yeah, and the other thing you'll see in some of the ILM productions and some other productions is actual just markers that are cloth markers that have codes on them that are on their arms and so on and so forth, to capture some of that data so that they can be in the set and just interacting with the actors, and then they'll grab that data. Now, we have to remember that most data that you see in final visual effects is not the motion capture data, so that I'm not sure exactly how accurate that body data is. But there's generally a lot of cleanup for most solutions like that, but that might be the main film camera plus a couple of witness cameras to grab onto that motion. Next question.
Coming in from Douglas Carmichael, he says, I saw a Jean-Michel Jarre behind-the-scenes special where they strapped Vive trackers to his legs. Have VR headset controllers been used for mocap tracking?
Go ahead, Nick.
Absolutely. And I apologize. This will be my last question. I'm going to have to head out after this one. But Vive accidentally created a motion capture system when they created trackers intended for props to be used in VR. So their intent was these little hockey puck trackers for their virtual reality systems would get mounted to things like ski poles or tennis rackets and things like that, so that you could go through the motions of a sport in virtual reality and ultimately, see that virtual reality taking place. It turns out that if you are able to track, the hands, the ends of the arms and the ends of the legs, the animation has a tool called inverse kinematics, in that the animation calculations will automatically move and rotate the elbow between that wrist and the shoulder. So with these types of setups, you could put a tracker for the torso and a tracker for each end of the arms and each foot, and get a rudimentary motion capture system. There's a fellow by the name of Matt Workman who has done quite a bit of this. And I mean, these days he actually owns a Vicon system, and he has accent suits, and he uses those more often than not. But when he first got started with this in his home at the early stages of COVID, he just converted his his Vive system with trackers into a character motion capture system. And so that absolutely has been done. The quality isn't necessarily as good. I mean, there's a little more noise and jitter in those trackers. They tend to be, they were intended just for kind of visually, simulating the motion of props inside a virtual reality experience, but they absolutely can work and have been used.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for stopping in. Nick will be here. We're going to try to get Nick in. Nick said, well, I can't come in because I have to leave in the last 15 minutes. So I was like, but the first 45 minutes, we'd love to have you. So hopefully we're going to have Nick on these 3D days jumping in pretty often. So we'll try to stay coordinated there, Nick. So but thank you for joining us.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Take care, everybody.
Let's go through the last couple questions.
All right. Thanks, Nick. From Juan C. Robles in Mexico, says, how much computer power or machines are required to do a full live production with motion capture?
You'd actually be surprised at how little you need to do this, because the rendering it's really how realistic you want the render to be. The actual capture of the motion capture, any gaming computer in the last 2 or 3 years would be more than enough to process that content. Now, if you start adding lots and lots of trackers, where this becomes more computationally intensive is really when you start having 5 people or 3 people on there with tons of trackers and extra things. That's where it can bog down a little bit. But 1 or 2 people, it's really not that much data. And so to do the capture itself does not require a particularly powerful PC beyond a relatively good game PC. So, I mean, most of the machines that we've used probably would cost today $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 to use. You probably couldn't do it with a B-Link by Courtney, but it wouldn't take much above that to pull that off. Next question.
All right, this one comes in from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. It says, can you walk us through the different levels of motion capture? How does one start? Equipment, practice, etc. And what does growth in competency commonly look like?
The first place I would start is getting motion capture data and learning how to apply it to the characters that you have. There's raw data out there. If you do search for motion capture data, you're going to find a bunch of things that are available. So getting motion capture data, understanding how you're going to get that motion capture data onto your characters is the first thing to test. And then after that, we're going to be doing, one of the reasons we're introducing everybody to this is that we're going to hopefully partner with Drexel and Nick to do some captures. And so you'll see how that works and get the data that we actually created. Nick and I have been talking about that. So then you'll get to see that raw data and work on it there. I don't know of what inexpensive tools, and Rick might be able to help us with this as far as taking that raw data and using it. Most of the stuff that we've used in the past has been Motion Builder to do that. And that's not a free app. So that's what we've used for most of the time that I've worked. I mean, for the last 20 years, pretty much. It used to be called Filmbox back in the day, and now it's motion capture, and a lot of us have a motion board, and that's what a lot of us have used to make those adjustments. Let's go ahead to the next question.
Coming in from Douglas Carmichael, he says, how do you transfer mocap data into Unreal Engine or Unity?
Go ahead, Rick.
So a lot of the suits come with. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, a lot of those suits come with their own software. Okay, But I use Reallusion's iClone to clean up the data and join animations and pair like hand data with face data and body tracking data. But that's the tool I use. But like I said, a lot of the suits come with their own suite of applications and tools.
Next question.
Coming in from Chris Clark in Tempe, Arizona, says, have motion capture systems been used to identify people by their gait or other distinctive dynamics of their body movements, similar to the controversial uses of facial recognition software?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is that think about a time when you've seen someone you know that's way far away and you see them across a field and you know that that's Courtney or that's John just by their, you don't know it consciously, but you subconsciously know that's the person, and you don't have enough visual data to do that. So our brains are already doing that. And of course, there's definitely AI that can look at your gait, and it's actually remarkably hard to hide how you walk. Like it's, and there's a lot of information that you can gain out of that also, injuries, other idiosyncrasies that are there. And you can mask it obviously by walking a different way, but there's a lot of subconscious things that are happening in your gait that are hard to mask. And so they're definitely used as a contributing factor for identification for some systems. Not generally the only one, because they are a little bit more error prone because there's so many variables. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, impressionists and comedians tuned in on this before there was such a thing as motion capture, as they'd imitate John Wayne's walk or his swagger or his body language. Is easy to imitate, and then that way they're basically identifying someone by their body movement.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Coming in from Ron Myers in Bel Air, Maryland, he says, "Are there flat, soft discs for attaching to the suits? For example, doing a forward roll, knee, shoulder, or back going to be in contact with the floor under body weight. I wouldn't want a hard marker ball between my knee and the floor." Ouch.
We usually think I'll be honest, I mean, most of the motion capture that we've done, and we've done a lot of rolling motions and so on and so forth, we worry about a softer mat that they're going to go onto, but we don't change if the balls deform, their center deforms, and sometimes it's harder for us to know where they are. And so this is also where some of those inertial ones have been a little bit easier. Inertial, and there's some that are basically using a magnetic resonance, and those can be a little less impactful into what that looks like. But we definitely used just the hard markers, and we just try to soften what they're actually running into. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that brings up to the question, if they're doing stunts and having pads on the floor, does the motion of them walking across the pad introduce a level of error into the motion tracking?
It does.
That you have to compensate for somehow?
Yep, absolutely. Anything you do that's not accurate to what they're actually standing on is going to be something you have to correct for. Now, what we do is we can add animation to that, so we can say, well, this is really the floor. You were treating this like the floor, but we're going to move it down, and it'll pull everything. You can either move the whole character, or you can move their feet. There's a lot of things that you can do with delta calculation. So, for instance, if I might throw a punch, and when I throw that punch, I'm going to come up short. What I can do is using the IK, I can grab onto your hand and pull it forward another inch, and have it actually impact the CG character directly. But that's not. I'm not reanimating them. So everything here is all the same, and it's right when the hand comes out, I'm going to grab it and just pull it a little bit more and back. So it's a delta animation of just adding a little bit to it over a couple frames and then having it go back to the physical one. And especially on something that's fast motion, that can be fairly effective. Next question.
All right, comes in from Rick Barkley in Baraboo. Nick, well, Nick's gone, but what are you using for hand and finger capture? Maybe Alex or Rick.
I don't know what Nick uses for that. There are some gloves the gloves actually oftentimes have, they're not inertial, but sometimes they actually have sensors going down them that are going to give you some finger data. But finger data is one of the more difficult things actually to grab onto, and I don't know what Nick uses, so we'll have to save that question. Next question.
All right, this one's from Andy Carluccio in Washington, D.C. Says, how long do you think active tracker systems like OptiTrack or BlackTracks have until they are eclipsed by volumetric point clouds and machine learning skeletal tracking?
I don't think it's very far away. I mean, I think that, with photogrammetry, we were, there was LiDAR and laser scans, and those were easier and faster for a long time to get the absolute data. The being able to pull a volumetric person out of it, and that's something that the problem right now is that volumetric calculation is very computationally expensive. So that now requires a lot of processing, and it rarely happens in real time. So the clean data that comes out of these trackers, the relatively clean data, is something that's very light and easy to use, and something that we can use in real time. It's just a factor of processing power to get to a point where we can actually take the volumetric data and pull it out, because Microsoft and other folks are already building these stages that are generating 3D scenes that you can move around in that are capturing volumetrically. You're still seeing resolution issues. So there's, it's not the perfect geometry there, as well as, it's very, very computationally expensive. All right, I think we have one more question.
One more question coming in from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. He says, discuss the 3D tracking system used at the Olympics.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have the answer to this. That's why I asked the question. But they used a tracking system in Tokyo. It was an Intel product called 3DAT. And they had an artificial intelligence program that used deep learning to analyze the athlete's movements and identify key characteristics like top speed, deceleration. And then they shared that information with the viewers by displaying slow motion graphic representations of the action, highlighting key moments. And that whole process took less than 30 seconds. And we're, 4 years away from Tokyo, so they must have something more sophisticated now. I just wondered if anyone knew about it.
Yeah, maybe we have to try to find somebody in Intel to come on and explain it to us on a Wednesday. So we'll take a look at that. I have no idea how they're doing that. Next question.
A few late arrivals here from Lois Richter in Davis, California. Have these techniques been used with animali or animate?
Animals.
Animals? Is that what she means?
Yeah. So they've absolutely been, it's getting the markers on them. I've seen them done with horses, done with chimpanzees, although the ones that I saw with chimpanzees are really hard to get them to stay on. They're good at taking them off. Horses less good at it. And so they definitely have done. I've actually seen them paint birds. So they'll paint the birds along those joints, and then they'll capture them flying around, and then they'll they can get wing motions and so on and so forth to at a pretty accurate setup. Go ahead, Courtney. Oops, can you hear me, Courtney? Sorry.
I'd like to see him get that horse into a spandex suit, though. That's all.
No, yeah, it's been more straps than that. Yeah, absolutely. The horses. I'm not going to be able to get that out of my head. All right, next question.
Okay, from Douglas Carmichael, he says, could you see motion capture being used to enable synthetic avatars to be used in video chat or conference apps?
I can. People are doing this now. I mean, they're definitely using a lot of the machine learning to figure out ways to have the avatars do what you're doing while you're doing it. I really do think, though, the more we do this, that I feel like when we give someone a synthetic version of themselves, there'll be certain people that like it, but I think long exposure to it will have people feel empty, because there's just so much going on in how we move and our eyes and our face and everything else, and we won't be getting that. And I think that in short terms, it's kind of fun. In long terms, I think it gets to be taxing, on the person watching. Like it's this unfulfilled need for real connection that isn't going to happen with that technology. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. All right. Thank you to our producers for a great series of questions. And and kind of following along here. I know that it's a deeper subject for some of you, but we're going to talk more and more about it by the end of the year. We probably have a lot of experts here who understand it. And want to thank Nick, he's not here right now, and Rick, who is back. It's good to have you, Rick. So hopefully we'll see you on more Wednesdays. And thank you to the rest of our panelists for answering the questions and creating a great conversation. Can't do this without you. All right, now we're going to go ahead and jump into After Hours. Stay tuned.